How many of you are excited it's Christmas season? Anybody? Couple of you? Okay, well, I won't tell you that Christmas is my favorite season then. I'll say it's something else. But in reality, Christmas is my favorite season. But I'm also a one holiday at a time guy. Like, I will not let my wife decorate for Christmas until after Thanksgiving. Anybody else? Can I get an amen from some of you? There you go. Like, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. We don't start decorating for Thanksgiving way back in June, right? Like there's a certain time of the year. How many of you have certain Christmas traditions that you kind of do every year, right? The music starts for me like November 26th. That's when we can start playing some Christmas music. How many of you decorate your homes? Anybody? Lights? Outside maybe? My favorite, there's a subdivision near me that they have the hall lights and the music, and it's fun to see. And the guy next door just has this like in lights ditto. Like I don't actually do any of the decorating. I don't like to decorate. My wife does that. But we all have certain like Christmas traditions. Some of them are weird. How many of you? And I didn't even know this was a thing until several years ago. How many of you hunt for a pickle in your Christmas tree? Anybody? Couple hands here and there. Yeah, you're kind of ashamed. I don't know exactly where this comes from. Go look it up. Google it when you get home. But this is a thing that kind of seems weird to me. But my brother actually, every Christmas break, is sort of a Christmas tradition. They watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't know why, but that's what he and his wife do. And I actually had a chance to a couple months ago, actually watched through the series once again. It's probably, for me, the greatest film trilogy of all time. But I hadn't seen it in a number of years, and so I was watching through it again with my son. And throughout the movie, I just felt myself, time and time again, just sort of welling up with emotion. Now, it's sort of weird. It's an action movie. It's one of those big-budget action movies. But the author of the books was a Christian, was a believer, and so he mixes all of these Christian illusions and Christian hopes and into this movie, into his book. And as the director was making the movie, it's hard for these themes not to come out. What does hope look like when all hope seems lost? When at the last possible moment, when it seems like everything is going to go bad, hope and light breaks in. And as I was watching with my son, I'm like trying to hold back tears. I'm getting emotional just watching this. Because in the midst of our hopes, sometimes it's so easy to lose hope. Hope, especially at this time of year, this Christmas season, when we're supposed to be happy and the season's full of hope and love and joy and peace, it can be so easy to feel the opposite. Because here's the thing, our lives aren't scripted like a movie. It can be so easy to watch a movie and we know it's going to turn out good in the end. We know that good is going to conquer evil. And maybe in our own minds, as we look at the broad scope of Christian history, we know okay, God's going to win at the end. But when you're in the moment, when you're living your life and you're not sure how it's going to end up, sometimes it's so easy to lose hope. To give in to despair. Some of you right now, this time of year especially, you're dealing with relationships that are broken. And even maybe with your family, as you think about them gathering maybe at your house or you going to visit them, it brings a little bit of hurt up for you because you know your relationships with them aren't great. Maybe this time of year you're dealing with being reminded of the loss of loved ones. And you're missing them. And in the moment, it can be so easy to give in to despair. Where is hope in my mourning? This time of season, maybe you're dealing with a marriage that isn't what you anticipated. It wasn't what you hoped for. And you're living with that reality. Maybe it's raising children or having grown children who are far from the Lord. And your hope for them this morning is simply that they would know Jesus. In a world, in a time of season that can be so full of hope and joy and peace and love, it can be so easy to feel the opposite. Or this morning, as we look at the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, maybe you're dealing with not having children. Your hopes and your dreams and your desire is to have children, and you're dealing with childlessness. Where is hope in the midst of it? We see this, the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth comes to us in the book of Luke. If you have your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 1. Because it's not just enough to have hope. The question I want us to look at this morning is, how do we wait in hope? How do we wait in hope? What does that look like? Even when all else seems lost, when it seems like things aren't going to turn out like we expected them to. How do we wait in hope? Luke chapter 1, we'll be starting in verse 5. Luke chapter 1, verse 5. In the time of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Now, I just want to stop there for a moment. To set the stage to understanding the culture that Zechariah and Elizabeth are living in. Because there's this weirdness that Luke is talking about. Luke, this early follower of Jesus, is writing a complete account of Jesus' life. And he tells a story of Zechariah and Elizabeth who are childless but righteous. Now, to us, we don't associate being childless with also being cursed and shamed by God. But in that culture, there were certain economic and social realities. Number one, we find out that Zechariah and Elizabeth are very old. They've been childless their whole lives. And, man, they got to 30 and 40 and 50 and maybe even 60, and they're thinking, man, I just want children, but it never comes. And one of the reasons for desiring children was an economic reason. When you get old, there were no social safety. There wasn't Social Security. There wasn't Medicare. So the parents have children for economic reasons, not just to love them and care for them and have them a part of your family, but so that they can also take care of you when you get old. You get to a certain point in your life where it's like, all right, I took care of you your whole life. Now you're going to take care of me the rest of mine. And that's sort of how the culture worked. You had children so that someday they could take care of you. So now we see that they're very old, and what happens? There's no social safety net for them. There's no children to take care of them. Zechariah is going to have to continue to work day in and day out. Imagine the amount of despair Zechariah is dealing with as he gets to being very old and losing hope of ever having children. There was also a cultural, shaming reality as well. In that culture, to be childless was a sign that you were cursed by God, and it was all the woman's fault, by the way. So ladies, imagine being childless and it's like you're childless because you're a sinner, because you've done something wrong. In fact, Jewish teachers of the day would actually recommend to men to divorce their wives and marry someone else so that they can have children. Imagine having that pressure on you. Not just kind of wondering, where is my future reality going to come from in terms of who's going to take care of me when I'm older, but now all of the community kind of whispers behind your back, there's Elizabeth we all know what kind of woman she is. She is childless. But Luke says something else. But they were righteous in the eyes of God. So all of those whispers weren't true. They weren't. She wasn't cursed. She was righteous. She was blessed. We find that they both were. And that word, that they were righteous in the eyes of God and were morally upright. Luke was intending to give the readers an understanding of people like Abraham, who was a giant of the faith, of Noah, of Job, that even though sometimes bad things happen, yet it wasn't because they were sinners. In reality, they were righteous. Zechariah and Elizabeth longed and hoped for children that seemingly never came. So their hope was tied up in children that weren't there. But there were also larger hopes as well, and we begin to see this as we continue on. Verse 8. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty, so he was a priest, and what happened is the responsibility of a priest every once in a while was to go to Jerusalem and to work in the temple. So when his division was on duty, he was serving as a priest before God. He was chosen by lot according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time came for the burning of incense, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Now let me just stop, because there's a larger hope that wasn't just for Zechariah and Elizabeth that this passage is talking about. It's a hope for all of Israel. At the very beginning, we find out King Herod is ruling. He's the king of Judea. King Herod was a puppet of Rome. Rome had conquered Israel. Israel had gotten used to being conquered and reconquered and conquered by someone else. And imagine century after century, it's just one foreign power after another ruling over you. Except for one revolt. Except for one guy, a guy named Judas Maccabeus, who several centuries earlier had come in and they had kicked the foreign powers out, and they had reestablished worship in the temple, and everything was going great. In fact, if you hear about the Hanukkah, the time of Hanukkah, that celebrates this revolt that happened. Like so much of Jewish festivals and realities where they tried to kill us, but we beat them. Why? Because God worked a miracle. So they were once again longing and hoping for a Messiah. And even around the time of Jesus' birth, there were lots of Messiahs who were popping up. Israel longed for a Messiah, but some had lost faith. Some had essentially become Jews in name only. We're going to become more like Rome. We're not going to be faithful Jews anymore. We're going to, what they call Hellenized. We're going to become like the world around us. But there was this group of people, priests, who day in and day out remained faithful to God, the worship of God, and Zechariah was one of these men. And so twice a year, Zechariah would make the trip up to Jerusalem. When sort of his division, it was his division's turn, when his group of priests' turn, he would go up to Jerusalem, make the trek up, and while they were there, there'd be sacrifices, and everybody would have their own job. But one of the best jobs you could get, and you only got this once in your lifetime, the most highly honored job was to go into the holy place and to light incense for the sacrifice. Like priests dream of that day. Like they're the man that day. And it came Zechariah, he had won the lot. Finally, after years and decades, he had won the lot to be able to go in and light the incense. And so he was to go in to light the incense, maybe say a prayer, long for the Messiah, pray a messianic prayer, Lord, send your Messiah. And then he was to go back out, say a blessing over the people, and that was his shot. That's what he longed for. That was the honor. And like so many times before him, for years and decades and centuries, Zechariah goes in, but something happens. God breaks in to the routine. To the routine they had carried out time after time after time. And this is what happens. Verse 11. So Zechariah goes in and he lights the incense, no doubt saying this prayer for Messiah. It says, then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. John means Yahweh is gracious. You are to call him Yahweh is gracious. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he'll be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. Elijah is this great prophet, this great man of God in the life of Israel. And so this angel saying he'll be in the same spirit as this great man of Israel. To turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Zechariah asked the angel, how can I be sure of this? I am an old man and my wife is well along in years. Zechariah doubts. I mean, think for a moment what this angel is saying. Your child's not going to be just any child who's going to like take care of you when you're old and all. Like, this child is special. This child will be one of the great ones. Zechariah and Elizabeth's prayers are answered in such an amazing way, so much beyond their capacity to understand. Like, we saw the video. It's like expecting and hoping for a little piece of chocolate, but when reality comes, you get the cupcake. It's like being childless and all of a sudden finding out you're now with sextuplets. And all of them will grow up to be president of the United States. Like, it's like being, like praying for healing from cancer and find out that God has not just healed you, but he's also made you 30 years younger. Like, that's how amazing this news is. It is not good news, it is great news. And no doubt for Zechariah and Elizabeth, when all hope seems lost, God shows up. He breaks into the routine and says, listen, I'm going to give you a miracle. I'm going to do something so beyond your wildest comprehension. Even in your old age, I'm going to open up Elizabeth's womb, and this child will point people to Messiah. Is it any wonder Zechariah goes, really? Like, you know I'm old, right? You know Elizabeth's old. Like, how are you going to do this? This seems unbelievable. Sometimes when we're at our last moment, before we lose all hope, true hope beyond our wildest expectations can seem so unbelievable. This is what the angel says. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel. I'm not just any angel, I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens. And because you do not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering, why'd he stay in so long? This isn't this long. Like, you're in and you're out. But when he came out to say the blessing, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he had kept making signs to them but remained unable to speak. And when his time of service was completed, he returned home. After this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant, and for 5 months remained in seclusion. The Lord has done this for me, she said. In these days he was shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people. The people notice his silence. He's unable to speak. But God speaks in a powerful way. The God of miracles works in an amazing way. Elizabeth, even though old, becomes pregnant. Now, throughout Israel's history, especially when people who are childless all of a sudden have children, it's seen as God opens up their womb and that there will be something special about that child. We see Abraham and Sarah, who have Isaac. We have Hannah, who has this great leader, this great prophet in Israel, Samuel. Time and time again, we see when God opens wombs, there's something special about this child. Something for people to make notice of. And so once again, God breaks into the routine, performs a miracle, and now Elizabeth is transformed. She has not just any child, but a child who sets the way for Messiah. It removes her disgrace. It removes her shame. God worked in an unexpected way. The God of miracles brings a miracle. How many of you in your own life this morning, in whatever situation you're dealing with, need a miracle? How many of you, maybe it's not something I name, maybe it's your own, whatever it is you're going through this season that maybe makes it difficult, or you look at the world and there are pockets of hope, there are pockets of good things happening, but there's also pockets of just bad stuff happening, and it grieves your heart, and it grieves mine as well. And it's so easy to say, God, where is hope in the midst of this situation? God, where is hope in the midst of the hopelessness? How does the God who works miracles work in that situation? Because so often we don't see a way out. We don't see room for hope. We see ourselves as unable to, like, we're 60 and we can't have children anymore. And we read similar impossibilities into different situations. Maybe it's some that those hopes that I had talked about at the very beginning, where you're dealing with broken relationships or children far from God, or the mourning the loss of loved ones, and this is a tough time, and you're like, God, I need you to work a miracle. Like, I need hope. Like, I need that reminder. How do we wait, though, in the meantime? For Elizabeth and Zechariah, their story wasn't done. And they continued to wait in faithfulness to God. To walk in faith, to live in faith, to remain faithful to God. This morning, know that your story isn't done. If you're here this morning and you're struggling in whatever way, know that the God of miracles can still work, and he has a plan, and maybe you don't even see this plan fulfilled. But know that God who works miracles wants to give hope to your situation, wants to work in your situation. Your story, too, is not done. And as we wait for that story to reach its fulfillment, we walk in faith and faithfulness to God. Time and time again, Zechariah could have given up. He could have divorced Elizabeth. He could have married somebody else, all for the purpose of having children. But God had a better plan, and he remained faithful. Don't give up. I see this happening so much in our culture, where we don't see hope. We lose hope. And we think, I have to take this into my own hands. I have to bring about God's will. Just know that God will work as God only can work. He will bring a miracle where we cannot. But we walk in faithfulness and hope. We seek to live Christ-like lives. And at times we need reminders of the faithfulness of God and the hope of God so that we can take that next step, so that we can continue to walk in faithfulness to God. This morning, if you're struggling, know your story isn't over. Continue to walk in faithfulness. Don't give up. Because the God who works miracles can and will still work. This morning, as some of you may have situations in your life, I want to just give an opportunity to respond. For me, one of the great hopes is so epitomized in something so un-Christian as a Christmas tree. Like, we don't see this in the Bible, but in our own culture, to sort of come to us, like, remind us that it's the Christmas season. One of my favorite stories is Martin Luther, who is walking home one night and he sees the stars shining through the Christmas tree, and he seeks to reinvent this for his wife and children when he gets home, to show him just the absolute beauty of it, because it reminds him of God and the ways that God shines light into the dark situations of this world. And that's where we get this tradition of lighting a Christmas tree. We also have another tradition in our culture of bulbs, Christmas ornaments. As we go throughout the season of Christmas, I just want to give you the opportunity this morning. There are some blank Christmas ornaments, just little flat pieces of wood. Maybe you have a hope this Christmas season that you want to write down, whether just like you want to draw a picture, maybe it's a word. Kids, I invite you up if you want to draw a picture, or whatever that would look like. Whatever it is your hope is this Christmas season, to just come write it on and then put it on the Christmas tree. And let this serve as a reminder to you that God is faithful. God is faithful to work in the midst of our hopes, in the midst of our unmet expectations, that the God of miracles is still alive and well in this world. As the worship team comes forward, we're going to sing this song that for me is one of my favorite Christmas songs. O come, Emmanuel. I think it so epitomizes the Christian hope, the Christian desire for Christ to come into our lives, into our world, and to once again bring transformation. In what areas of your life this morning do you need transformation? Or maybe this morning you just want to say, you know what, I want to stand in the gap for someone else. I want to remind myself to pray for them. Whatever hope you are needing this morning, I invite you to respond, to write it on an ornament, to stick it to a tree, to weekly during the season remind you of hope, of the God who works miracles, and to remember that your story too isn't over. As you come, the prayer team will be at the front. We'll be able to pray for you if you would like, or you can just come put your name on an ornament or put a word on an ornament, whatever would be on the ornament, and hang it to the tree and go back and sit down. What are you hoping for this season? Lift your prayers to God. Will you stand?